everyone. Welcome to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today we have part 4 of Evil Kids, focusing on Jesse Pomeroy and Peter Woodcock, an American and a Canadian. And this will be the 4th and next to the last installment in this series. This weekend I will be doing a standalone episode on a teenage serial killer, 𝗟𝗍𝗄𝗃, from the UK, and this will round out our series on evil kids. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and this is going to be an interesting one. Both of these are not very well known, actually. I mean, I'm sure people do know about them, but they are not they are not the most well-known serial killers that we have studied. And with that being said, I hope you enjoy it. This is the second time I'm recording this video. The first time I recorded it, the audio was terrible, so I had to go back and redo it. So I hope I do it a little bit better this time. And with that being said, a huge shout out to my patrons and my channel members. Without you, could not make improvements to the channel. I really appreciate it. And if you'd like to join them, those links are down below. Also, if you haven't, I hope I've earned your subscription right now. You can hit that subscribe button. If it's red, hit it. It means you're not subscribed. Like, comment, share. It gets me into the YouTube algorithm. Really makes a big difference. Even an emoji helps. So, with that being said, let's jump in to Jesse Pomeroy. 𝗟𝗲𝗁𝗃 Pomeroy, also known as the Boston Boy Fiend, the Boy Fiend, the Boy Torturer, the Inhuman Scamp, was born November 29th, 1859 in Charlestown, Massachusetts. He was the second or youngest son of Thomas Pomeroy, who was a United States Civil War veteran, as well as a Boston area dock worker who also suffered from alcoholism. His wife Ruth Pomeroy. He also had an older brother named Charles. He basically had a hard childhood. I've been doing some studying on sociopaths versus psychopaths. I really believe that Jesse Pomeroy was a psychopath. I really believe that he was, according to what I've read, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but sociopaths are still capable of forming some normal human attachments. You know, I always look to Dexter, the serial killer, fictional serial killer. He had attachments to his father, his sister, his wife, and his son. So he had some normal human attachments there. But when it came to the rest of society, he was just sort of apathetic. And this is usually something that is brought on by childhood trauma. In Dexter's case, the death of his mother. And the sickness of his mother. So it's something that's not necessarily born innately, but it develops over time because of situations. Now with psychopaths on the other side, they have a very hard time forming any sort of normal human attachments. They are born with this innate ability of cutting off all emotion and not forming any attachments, and it's usually triggered by something. The behavior may remain innate and just be something psychological, something that doesn't really play out in actions, but if something triggers it, then they can be set off onto a kind of a criminal road, criminal path. So that's what I read, and so with Pomeroy, I'm going to say that because of some of the things he was doing from a very early age, I'm going to say he had the innate ability, and long-time abuse by his father is what started him on the path, is what triggered off his behavior. As I said, his father was a dock worker who suffered from alcoholism and by all accounts was very abusive to both Jesse and his older brother Charles. And the mother, Ruth, was kind of an enabler. She didn't stop it, but she didn't necessarily agree with it either. But I don't think you can really hold that against her because we're talking about the 1800s, 19th century America, where divorce just wasn't done, and neither, were wives allowed to stand up to their husbands. So I think you find with a lot of these early people we've been studying, you do find a very submissive, enabling mother that allows things to happen. But not because they want it to, just because they really have no choice. I mean, honestly. Jesse was born with a white membrane, almost like a cataract, that covered his right eye pupil. So he had a normal colored eye on the left and then this almost solid white eye on the right. And as a result of that, it caused his father's abuse of him to be way worse than it was towards his older brother. His father, by all accounts, could not even stand to look at Jesse because of that what he considered handicapped that he had. And as a result, he took great pleasure in beating Jesse bloody with a belt. Now, I grew up where corporal punishment was kind of a standard, especially in the South. So hearing that somebody got spanked or, even twitched is not that big of a deal to me, as long as it's not in an abusive manner. I'm not going to get into a political argument about whether corporal punishment is right or wrong. I think it can be used as a tool for discipline, as long as it's not overdone. But beating somebody until they have whelps or they're bleeding is definitely abuse. That goes way beyond a couple of swats on the butt to tell somebody to stop doing what they're doing. That's what I'm saying. So yes, this was definitely abuse. And from the earliest age, Jesse did not want anything to do with other children. As soon as he was old enough to read, he started busying himself with reading dime store novels. And in the 1800s, these were normally stories of crime. A lot of Jack the Ripper fiction was popular. Lots of tales of the Civil War and the Western expansion and the Plains Indian Wars. So a lot of rather violent stories, and I know we could get off onto another tangent about do things like television, movies, video games, comic books influence people's behavior. I'm sure they can, but what I'm saying is somebody like me that grew up on that stuff didn't turn out to be a killer versus Jessie Pomeroy. If Jessie Pomeroy had not been abused, had not been bullied by other children, chances are, even if he still read all those violent books, he would not have grown up to do what he did. I think that it was way beyond the books that triggered him off. That's all I'm saying. But those were his hobbies, and when he did play with kids, he liked to play war, cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, the whole 9 yards. That sort of thing. At age 10, he was caught killing his mother's songbirds that she kept in the kitchen. He twisted their heads off and fed them to a cat, and was later on caught torturing that same cat with a knife. So there we have that age-old issue of children torturing animals that later turns into torturing humans. Even after he attended school, he still did not want anything to do with other people. He sort of kept to himself. And as a result, of course, was bullied even worse because of not only you got the kid over here with the weird eye, and he also doesn't want to talk to anybody. Of course, he's getting bullied. And that eventually led Jesse to acting out some bizarre revenge fantasies on some children, and we're going to talk about that. December 26, 1871. 4-year-old Charlestown, Massachusetts resident William Payne was found hanging from the roof of an outhouse in Powderhorn Hill, Massachusetts, strung up by his wrists, stripped butt naked, suffering from hypothermia. He had also been repeatedly beaten with a blunt object. The 4-year-old could not tell him who did this to him. He only described the person as having red hair. And that, by and large, went unsolved. A few days later, another child was found in a very bizarre situation, much like that, in which he said that somebody with dark hair had beaten him, tortured him, while also touching himself. So whoever was doing this had a kind of a fetish for torture. So let's just say between 1871 and 1872, there were quite a few children that were found Powderhorn Hill around that outhouse that had been tortured, though not killed. And local police put up a $500 reward for any information leading to it. But all they ever got was dark hair, pointy nose. They never really got any significant information about it. In July 1872, Jesse received what he called the beating of a lifetime from his father. And it was that finally prompted his mother, Ruth, to take action. And she took Jesse Charles and moved from Charlestown to South Boston, away from her abusive husband, where she opened her own seamstress shop. Once they relocated to South Boston, other boys in the South Boston area started having incidents of them being lured to areas and tortured. In a span of a year, young George Pratt, Harry Austin, and Joseph Kennedy were all stabbed, cut with a knife, beaten with blunt objects, and one of them, the perpetrator, attempted to cut his genitals off. Only Joseph Kennedy could remember, who was a little bit older, about 6, was able to explain to the police who actually attacked him. And he described a boy with dark hair and a milky eye. So as a result, the police took young Kennedy with them around the local elementary and junior high schools, and eventually Pomeroy was identified as the attacker, and he was arrested and tried and sentenced to an indefinite amount of time in a reformatory. The entire time, Jesse Pomeroy was saying that he was completely innocent, but finally, at the age of 12, he was committed to a child's reformatory in the Boston area. He remained there for 18 months at the Westboro Boys Reform School until his mother, who actually believed that her son had been framed for all of this, started a petition to get him out, and in 1874, that was granted due to the petitions and also to Pomeroy's excellent behavior while he was at the school. So he was paroled and released back into the custody of his mother. 6 weeks later, March 18th, 1874, Pomeroy was working in Ruth's shop when a 10-year-old girl named 𝗂𝗍𝗄𝗃 walked in and asked if they carried notebooks for school. Pomeroy asked her to come down to the basement with him as he thought they had a few left, and when he got her down there, he slashed her throat and stabbed her genitals repeatedly with a knife just to see how she would react. Upon her expiring, he did hide her bodies in the ash heap, which, if you know anything about an ash heap, it's simply a place where the ashes from the fireplace or the wooden stove are kept. So he killed this young girl and hid her in the ash heap of his mother's store basement. Over the next few months, Pomeroy attempted to do the same thing with various other children, both girls and boys, but none of them would go down to the cellar with him, and after a few of them had reported the creepy boy that worked at the seamstress shop or worked at the shop, people started taking a look at him and wondering what exactly was going on. And then in April of 1874, 4-year-old Horace Millen's body was found in a nearby marsh. He had been beaten, bitten, and stabbed, and it was at that time that they immediately arrested Pomeroy on suspicion and then searched the basement of the store, finding young Curran's body. And he immediately admitted that he had killed Curran. And later on, for the death of Millen, after he was told by Boston police officers that his mother and brother were being held as accomplices, and if he wanted to save them, he needed to confess. That's kind of good cop, bad cop, I know, but it's the 1800s. Shoddy police work. But let's just say he finally confessed, but wanted to plead not guilty by virtue of insanity. His trial ended in February of 1875. Jury was not convinced that he was insane and actually sentenced him to death. However, he was never executed. Why? Because 2 Massachusetts governors refused to sign the death warrant. sentence. And as a result, 3 different appeals were sent to the Massachusetts Board of Governors. 2 of them upheld the death convictions and the death penalties. The 3rd and final one basically was commuted to life without parole, and he was also sentenced to a lifetime of solitary confinement as a result. From the time that he was commuted to the time of his death by natural causes at the age of 72 in 1932, he only communed with guards and with his mother Ruth, who visited him once a month until she died. And as a result, Jessie Pomeroy died in prison in solitary confinement. I'm very sure that that would never happen today, because I'm sure that would be considered cruel and unusual punishment. I was able to find a picture that people say is Jessie Pomeroy in his later years. I will drop that here, but I'm unsure. So if it's not, then forgive me, but that is what I'm going to drop here. Interesting enough, that right eye that had the weird membrane over it was lost at about the midway point of his jail sentence, not because of the ailment, but because he attempted to blow up his cell and commit suicide by tampering with a gas line. He survived, but he did lose the function in that right eye. So, just, I guess, an irony. A lot of studies have been done on Jessie Pomeroy about what his modus operandi were. Most people agree that he was a psychopath and had some weird sexual fetish for being a sadist. And it just all kind of, combined into one perfect storm. But that's the story of Jessie Harding Pomeroy. And from that, let's travel from the Northeast United States up to Canada, Ontario to be more specific, and look at Peter Woodcock. Peter Woodcock was born March 5th, 1939, in a small town outside Toronto, Ontario, Canada, known as Peterborough. His mother was a 17-year-old factory worker named 𝗬𝗬𝘁𝗲 Woodcock, who attempted to keep her infant son. She worked very hard as a single parent trying to keep him, and actually breastfed him for a whole month. But due to her grave financial situation, she eventually gave him up for adoption at 4 weeks of age. He was immediately placed into the foster care system and went from foster home to foster home. The baby was unable to bond with any of his foster parents and also had a real issue when it came to feeding. I can understand why. No one could feed him from breast or bottle, evidently. And so his feeding and his care were quite tumultuous, and that, of course, doesn't bode well for children in the foster care system just because of the amount of care that you would have to give a child like that. He did not learn to speak until well after his 2nd birthday. In fact, at the age of 12 months, the only thing he could do was make whining and animal-like grunts, and this was noticed by his foster family. And at the age of 2, he was actually removed from one foster family when he was taken to the hospital with injuries to his neck, only to find out they had been physically abusing the 2-year-old. Finally, at the age of 3, he was given to Frank and Susan Maynard, who lived just outside Toronto, and it was his first stable home. They were lifelong foster parents of many children, as well as having a son of their own. It was in this family that he found the one person that he could actually bond with, and that was his foster mom, Susan Maynard, who was an aggressive kind of woman, but a very loving woman. And Peter did finally forge a simple human bond with her, though he not so much with the other foster kids or her natural son that were also in the home. He would not commune with them. He finally learned to speak, spoken English, but it was still very broken. And as a result, he kind of kept to himself. He was bullied by the other foster children in the home, as well as by neighborhood children. And as a result, he just seemed to grow further and further into himself. Frank and Susan Maynard would take him back and forth to the local children's hospital to get him counseling and speech therapy. as well as enrolling him in a private school to get him special educational opportunities. But he also continued to work with therapists the entire time. A therapist with the Children's Aid Society of Ontario described him at the age of 11 as a very angry little boy. He would not play nor socialize with the other children, although he did have a gift for academics. He was very gifted in science and English and mathematics, but still just kind of lived in his own head and refused to interact with the children in any normal way. It was also around the age of 12, 13, he started having an obsession with pornography and was actually caught with naughty books on occasion, as well as telling his counselors that he felt the need to live out some urges. 13-year-old. He always walked perfectly erect, looking straight ahead through his glasses, and would only show any sort of normal affection to his foster mom. He did tell a counselor once that he wished something would happen and kill all the children. He just had this huge hate for his peers, I assume because of the bullying and the abuse that had been heaped on him. He was kicked out of one private school because he, at the age of 13, did have sexual relations with a child younger than him. It was said it was consensual, but children under the age of 18 can't really consent. So, yeah. So he was expelled from that private school. And when he was 16, he was then homeschooled from age 14 to 16, in which his parents then enrolled him in yet another private school, and then on to public school. And it was there that he really did excel at academics. He won several awards, very rarely got less than 100% on any test or assignment. For the holidays, during his 16th year, his parents gave him a red and white Schwinn bicycle, which allowed him to wander far outside their normal neighborhood or where he went to school. He would ride around the city, out in the country. Even in the harsh Canadian winter, you would see this very spindly boy with glasses riding a bicycle out in normal spring or summertime garb. He began telling his parents that he had met some friends, but that eventually grew to a gang of 500 invisible boys that he called the Winchester Heights Gang. So instead of one imaginary friend, he had 500. And the fact it was a street gang, it's kind of scary. He only told his parents about this, though, after he had already been arrested and sentenced. So they didn't know, but this was already in his head. And he was already attempting to lure children around the Toronto area, city area, and the suburbs onto his bike for the purpose of living out fantasies with them, and that's all I will say. So he began attempting to do that, which led to a lot of children reporting a strange-looking man on a bicycle that was attempting to lure them away. September 15th, 1956, 17-year-old Woodcock would kill his first victim. He lured 7-year-old 𝗬𝗎 away from a local exhibition center and lured him into a secluded wooded area where he strangled him to death, bit him twice on his body, did some other things that I won't talk about, as well as undressing and redressing the body. Also, he allegedly used the bathroom near the body, and that's all I'm going to say. It was during this investigation that they took the reports of a boy with glasses on a bicycle, but police, and they accidentally arrested the wrong boy, a boy named Ron Moffat, who was actually 14, 3 years younger than Woodcock, because he did resemble Woodcock and had a very similar looking Schwinn bicycle. He was actually held for over a year while police investigated his alibi, and it was finally determined that, yes, he was at the movies during the time that 𝗬𝗎 disappeared, and he was eventually released. I can't even talk about that. That's bad police work. shoddy police work. I know this is Canada. I'm not sure how their constitutional or their civil rights work, but I know that they would be open up to a huge lawsuit in the United States for that. And anyway, Ron Moffat would go on to, with the help of author Nick Henley, publish a book in 2018 about his experience called The Boy on the Bicycle. However, not long after Mallett's body was discovered, October 6, 1956, the body of 9-year-old Gary Morris was found on Cherry Beach. That body, too, had been strangled, beaten, stabbed, bitten, and also undressed and redressed. According to the autopsy, the young boy died of a ruptured liver, that the beating was so bad. And then eventually, January of 1957, Woodcock lured away 4-year-old Carol Voice and took her to another secluded area near the city of Toronto and choked her, undressed and redressed her, and did things to her with a tree branch that I'm not even going to talk about. That was his final victim in his original crime spree. Witnesses to Carol Voice being ridden away by a young boy on a bicycle did come into the police, and they actually were put together a composite of a boy that fit Woodcock's description, spindly with glasses. I'll drop that composite drawing here. On a bicycle was the one that lured it away. And because young Ron Moffat was already in custody, they knew it couldn't be him. So finally, they released Moffat, as we've already talked about, and did arrest Peter Woodcock on January 21st, 1957, where he subsequently confessed to all 3 murders and confessed, "Please don't tell my mother. I don't want her to be disappointed in me." He was tried in April of 1957 and was found not guilty by reason of insanity, being sentenced to, and I'm going to say this all wrong, 𝗵𝗂𝘀𝗶𝗰 Mental Health Center in 𝗵𝗂𝘀𝗶, Ontario. So those of you in Canada, please feel free to correct my pronunciation. While in prison there, he underwent psychiatric analysis and treatment, where he was diagnosed as a psychopath, and underwent very controversial treatments, even by today's standard. LSD treatments, electroshock therapy, and therapy with various other types of drugs that would never be administered to people with mental health problems today. While there, he did coerce other patients into sexual acts with him, and would bribe guards with cigarettes and things of that nature to buy their silence. He was eventually transferred from that, which was more of a maximum security hospital, to a less secure hospital called 𝗥𝗲𝗽𝗀 Psychiatric Hospital. Here they were treated as if they weren't in the hospital. They had day passes and had movie nights, and it was here, after seeing Silence of the Lambs, that he officially and legally changed his name from Peter Woodcock to David Michael Kruger. He also became good friends with former murderer who had also been incarcerated with him at the mental hospital, Bruce Hamill, who had been released and was now working as a guard at the local Ottawa courthouse. And they actually began a homosexual relationship. Meanwhile, Kruger, or Woodcock, however you want to call him, also began trying to solicit favors from another patient by the name of Dennis Kerr, who actually refused it and didn't want anything to do with Woodcock. So, on July 13th, 1991, Bruce Hamill, remember his boyfriend, went to a hardware store, brought a plumber's wrench, a hatchet, knives, sleeping bag, went to the 𝗏𝗏ville Hospital, signed out Kruger on a day pass, as well as Dennis Kerr, and they all were going to go hiking and camping. Well, let's just say that Mr. Kerr didn't make it out of the woods. He was beaten, stabbed, and violated. And immediately, Woodcock or Kruger went and turned himself in to the local Ottawa Police Department. After sentencing, he was transferred back to the Maximum Security Mental Health Center and there died March 5th, 2010 at the age of 71 of natural causes. Couldn't find any information on what happened to his boyfriend as a result of this, but I can say that both of these cases thus far really show how the justice system fails both Americans and Canadians a lot of the time. The second murder should never have happened. It should never have happened. I don't know what the proper way to deal with those that are criminally insane is, but I don't think they should be allowed unobserved, unaccompanied day passes, especially with someone who is also a rehabilitated murderer. I mean, I don't know what you're thinking there, Ottawa, but okay. I would imagine that this has changed since then. At least I hope it has, but wow. I know that the police aren't perfect, but these are just model cases of how inept some of them can be. I support the police 100%, first responders, but when you read stuff like this, you're just, I can only hope things have gotten better. Anyway, that's the story of Jessie Pomeroy and Peter Woodcock. I hope you enjoyed them. I'll be back really soon with another video, and until then, keto and crime.